Well, hello, friends, and welcome back to this journey we're on with me, Paul Reeves, your host. We'll be with my good friend Bruce Lowe once again. Today we're going to be talking about the song Hidden. And really, I guess when it comes down to it, we're going to be talking about what I think is the best news of all. And after this second conversation, I can see that, even though I thought they were going to be a little bit shorter, they're probably going to be closer to 45 minutes to an hour. That's when we get together on Tuesdays. We hang out and talk for about an hour, and that's probably going to be about the length of this. We'll see. Subject to change. I'm still learning, but what I will do is I am going to include the different sections in the show notes. So if you don't have a full hour and you just want to check out a particular section, I'll do my best to do a good job of labeling the general idea and where it begins. So with no further ado, let's jump right into it. Thanks so much for being here. Well, Bruce, good to be with you as always.
Great to be with you too, Paul.
Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the song called Hidden. And one thing that I'm hoping to accomplish is to show that our journey of faith, it has a balance between the energy that we delegate to our head and our heart. And while I feel like it's easy to swing one way or the other, we all know people who are very wise and smart, but sometimes, you may sense that they might be slightly disconnected from their heart. And we also know the other person who seems very heart and experience oriented that may not pay, enough attention to the head. And my thought is that to get the full experience, what we're doing is we're offering God both our head and our heart in worship. That's the way that I usually describe you, is you are the beautiful balance, and not the balance in a way that it's saying it's a lesser amount of either one, but a full offering of both the head and the heart. And that's how I usually describe you. And so this is such a joy and honor to get to talk through this theme with you.
Well, for me too. I think it'll help listeners to hear that I'm feeling a little nervous about even talking about this, because I think it is such a fine balance, isn't it, to gain? And I think the problem is, as you try to find the balance in any topic like this, there's going to be people on both extremes hearing things one way or hearing the other. And so, my encouragement is that the organization that I work for, our motto is a mind for truth and a heart for God. And so there are people who are trying to find that balance, and I certainly am trying to find it as well. And super excited to be talking to you, Paul, because I feel like you also have drawn me into asking some of the important questions and your honesty. So appreciate being here today.
Oh, man. Well, today we're going to talk about this song called Hidden. And in short, this song is a love song to God, savoring the intimacy that I've experienced with God, especially over these last 8 years. I think one of the gifts behind cancer or any kind of suffering is that it has the potential to be just the needed ingredient to push you closer to the heart of God. If you're willing to surrender, while that might seem totally out there, I think it makes perfect sense if you break it down. I mean, what's the main element in finding out news that you have cancer? Obviously, when people get that news, sometimes there's this fear that one feels, naturally, the fear of death. So fear is present. Well, what casts out fear? We're told in Scripture, and many of us have had firsthand experience, that it's love that casts out fear. And then it's like, well, who is the one that is the embodiment of love? We say that God is love. And so the closer that I get to the heart of God, the closer I come to the very essence of love. And that experience cast out the fear in my heart. So the end result is both the removal of fear and increased intimacy of God. And so that's, real clear right off the bat. If someone said, well, how could this be a gift? Well, that's real easy to understand, how that could, you can systematically understand how suffering could produce, such a gift. While this 8-year journey, with cancer has been exhausting in so many different ways, every time the heat gets turned up, it pushes me right into the heart of God, who's the source of all love, all peace, and all joy, all that's good. And that experience is so magnificent that the trade ends up, always seemingly being, in my favor. We could take last week, for example. I've been spending a tremendous amount of energy trying to figure out the ins and outs of releasing this music. In this day and age, at times it's been so much that I can totally feel my spirit, coming out of calibration. I remember there was a season of creating these songs where there was so much time spent simply in communion with God and basically just reporting back from that time together in the form of song. And, what a beautiful experience that was. But then the pressure of what feels to be so urgent creeps in, like this, all the different pressures that could be felt around releasing music. And I could feel that intimacy becoming more distant. Well, last week I found out there's a new spot of cancer that's developed in my lung, and obviously that's not the news I was hoping for.
Yeah.
But even 4 days later, I feel like I've just gotten back from a life-changing retreat, and that's the beautiful built-in effect of suffering. It can either cause you to become bitter, and you dig in and try to control whatever situation you're trying to control is even more, or you can use the curriculum of suffering, and you can surrender and let that situation propel you forward into the heart of God. It's gotten to the point after 6 times now of learning that I have cancer where it's become like Pavlov's dog. I know now when I get unwelcome news, there's going to be a time of suffering. There's going to be a time where it does feel really dark. And I think there's something by default that it has to get to that point where it has to get to be too much. It's not like you can look out of the corner, of your eye and go, well, I can see the beautiful, end result right around the corner. It's like for a little bit, it feels like that's the definition of trust, not being able to see the other side. And you just feel like, man, I feel like I am surrounded by darkness right now. And so naturally, there's that feeling of darkness. But then I know that after that, it's going to sober up my soul and make me feel the things that had become numb. I'm never hoping for bad news, but I do know what bad news does every single time. It pushes me further and further into intimate experience with the source from which I came from.
Wow, what is there to say at this point, Paul? I mean, of course, you and I have already talked about the bad news that came, but even just as we reflected off air about some of this, it reminded me of C.S. Lewis when in The Horse and His Boy, where Shasta is riding on Bree, the horse, the talking horse, and the lion is chasing them. They don't know it's Aslan. They think it's just a lion. And it says they were running as fast as they could, at least as fast as they thought they could. And it just is amazing, isn't it, how the Lord knows just every little button, every little way to kind of unwrap things and unwrap the package. And there's nothing like the experience itself. So, brother, I feel for you, as we've already talked about off air. But I just appreciate even your words and your reflections about the way the Lord's using this.
I mean, it seems like by default suffering, like I don't know, like all the meanings behind, ancient words, but I did look up in Latin, patience. It's patio, and which means to suffer. And so it's like, well, when do you have to exhibit patience or suffering? It's like, it's when you can't control the situation. It's like you're at a checkout line and you're seven carts deep going back into the aisle. And what's so miserable about that is like, you can't just say, everybody get out of the way. Like, you're stuck. Like, you can't control the situation. And so even in those situations, you feel it. You're like, I'm suffering. And it feels like just in any form of suffering, it does remind you that, hey, you're not in control of this situation.
Yeah.
And there's something, and what does that do? By default, if it gets pushed so far, then you have to finally surrender control.
Yes.
Which how much energy are we endlessly spending every day in this illusion that we're controlling our lives? And so, what's so, I guess, relieving is when you finally give up that control, you acknowledge that backpack that gets taken off of you. You go, oh my goodness, there was that much weight that I was carrying in this little make pretend game that I play, saying that I'm controlling the situation by working hard and doing my best and doing all this. It's like when that weight's removed, you go, oh, wow. Even with the onset of the weight of the bad news, you realize that the net gain at the end is you go, wow, I was carrying more weight, which just got removed from the weight than the weight that I just put on. And so you actually feel lighter. It's crazy.
As you're talking about that, even some of the metaphors that you're using here remind me of a passage in the Bible in Paul's letters. And in his letter to the Philippians, in Philippians chapter 3, he talks about profit and loss. Whatever was to my profit, I now consider loss. And he says, for the sake of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I've lost all things, I consider them rubbish, that I may gain Christ and be found in him. And the very subject that you're talking about here, the hiddenness, the intimacy, even that mystical connection that we can have with him is all there in that discussion, that as Paul unpacks that. And one thing that's so beautiful about that passage too, Paul, is as the Apostle Paul unpacks this, he says, I want to know Christ. And you can just see that it's the cry of his heart. He's like, everything else to me is a loss compared to that. And then he says, the power of his resurrection, the commonality of sharing in his suffering. And it's kind of like, the World War II in the trenches thing that you hear of, that when two people are sharing in common in the trenches, they have a bond and connection that can't be broken, can't be explained. Yeah. And so Paul's saying, look, I know that Christ suffered when he came here to earth, so I want to participate in that suffering. He's actually calling into a desire, not a kind of macabre, desire to push into suffering, but because he knows that the greatest evil, the greatest pain can actually produce the greatest good. Yeah. And I think in this, there's this amazing reflection to be had, just in general, about even the problem of evil, that people so often, I think, blame God when they really should be blaming Satan. You look at Genesis and you see the role of Satan. You look at Job and you see the role of Satan. I think there's a lot of discussion to be had to unpack, the cosmic stuff that's going on behind the scenes and how we forget that there's a battle going on. But I think the other side of this discussion that we miss is this idea of the greatest good. We can only see things through a certain glasses. And sure, after the fact, we can look back and go, oh, that was really good. But Paul has this ability in that passage to be looking forward and saying, actually, no, this is good. Like, I can anticipate difficulty and seeing that it can produce the greatest good, which is intimacy with Christ.
I mean, that feels like, that to me feels like the good news, like that you can relate with God and that you can experience intimacy with God. I think that's why I really wanted to discuss this, because I know I've had experiences in the past. I know a lot of people, a lot of friends of mine have had experiences which have sort of pushed them away from church environments sometimes, where they felt like this experiencing God has been too tightly clamped down on or policed. I mean, yeah, I think about, like when I was a child, I was obsessed with basketball, and I knew a lot about Michael Jordan, and I'd watch his tapes and his bio and, all that stuff. And I knew a lot about him. If someone told me, hey, by the way, that's Michael Jordan in the backyard, shooting baskets, like, wouldn't it be silly to say, oh, well, I've got his documentary, Come Fly With Me, on VHS. I'll just watch it and I'll learn more about him. You'd be like, why don't you go out back and meet him?
Yes.
And then also in the same way, if you spent time with someone all the time, like, I don't know, like say you were, okay, take that same example, but you're his driver, and say you spent a lot of time with him and say that he let the window down and so he would talk to you every day and you would, you had this personal experience with him. Well, say you found out, oh, this is the, the best basketball player of all time, or, one of them.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you, if someone told you about that, wouldn't you go, well, I want to watch his documentary or read about him.
Yes.
You would want to learn about him. So they're not independent of one another.
It's a great analogy,
Like
Paul.
you want both.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm not, we're not saying to leave one out. We're just saying, hey, this just makes sense to really want both.
That's right. So well said. And if you, on the flip side, when you want to hang out with that guy, if you listen to all the VHS, watched all the VHSs, so it's both ways, isn't it? This is exactly what we're talking about here. We've one of Satan's tricks is to divide us up, get us, the thinkers in one camp, the feelers in another, the actors in another, the doers. And it's like, no, we need to come together and be the body of Christ. That's exactly what Paul was saying. In all of its diversity, coming together in the harmony of that the Spirit of God brings, when there is this subject-to-subject humility to receive from other people. So I think the heart and the head is connected by the Spirit. I know, just to get technical on one passage of Scripture, one passage that people really struggle with is that passage in Romans chapter 7 where Paul talks about in my mind I am a slave to the law of God, but in my flesh I'm a slave to the law of sin. It's like one part of him is trying to is conscious of what's right and convicted about that, and he actually says that is the mind. But he says this other part of him, he feels like he's having an out-of-body experience because this body seems to want to go in the opposite direction. Sounds like The Last Man Standing. So, and anyway, but
Last Man Standing is another song that's coming up.
Yeah. But I think Paul's answer to the question actually relates to the ancient view of physiology. And the ancient view of physiology was that breath was a nutrient and that breath came into your lungs and then proceeded to be pumped into your brain. And there it transformed your brain and it gave life to your brain. And it also then, your brain transformed it and sent it out to the rest of your body to bring life. And so the connection between the mind and the body was actually breath. In the ancient way of viewing things, it was almost like they collapsed the circulatory system into the nervous system.
Oh, wow.
We would say we now know that the brain, through the nervous system, controls our actions, etc. But for them, they kind of collapsed the two into one. Now we could kind of look at that and say, okay, so Paul had more of an ancient view. He didn't have the benefits of modern physiology. But you kind of say, in God's good timing, the snapshot of physiology that they had allows for the combining of what's really going on with God's Spirit. Because God's Spirit really is the breath, as it were, that flows like the circulatory system, brings life throughout the body. But he is also the one who is a person who comes and affects your mind and allows to create that connection. So this moment in Romans 7 where Paul is struggling to work out how can I get my mind and my body connected, the answer to the question within that ancient physiological process, which in God's kindness gives us the picture that gives him the metaphor that he needs to explain how the Spirit of God actually works. It is the Spirit of God who allows this connection between the mind and the heart and the body and the hands and the feet and the life. And I know that that's kind of getting technical into ancient physiology and it's getting technical into things, but I think it's just so tremendously important because so many of us are struggling with that tension of how does my mind and what I know get played out in my actions? How does it not end up being this frustrating thing where we're either turning back in on our mind and we're not seeing any change in our action anyway, or we just kind of forget our mind and we just live life and don't even have time to think? I think that's a huge, the Romans 7 tension that you feel is a huge tension for people.
You know, I think the thing that, once again, that I love so much about you is the way that I'll describe you is I'll say, man, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that has such a balanced offering of both the head and the heart. You know, everybody knows, everyone that I know that knows you has such a great appreciation for the wisdom that flows out of your heart. Actually, that just said it, because it's not just coming out of your mouth. It really feels like it's, it's connected to the heart. It's not just like this information that you're, giving people. You give it in a way that really does inspire transformation. And I do feel like in Western culture, there's been such an emphasis placed on the mind and what we know, and knowledge is power. And, and then in Eastern cultures, there's probably a heavier emphasis on experience, maybe the heart side of things. And I'm not trying to offer any kind of prescriptive advice of how to pursue God, but it seems like, if we're talking about the song Hidden, the first line of the song says, now I get lost in the sound of the song that's been singing. Has it been here all along? Well, I couldn't hear it. It's like, it feels like this song of life that is echoing through the cosmos that God has written. He wants our hearts and minds and all that we are to tune in to this song that's going on all around us. And I know people listen to music in different ways. Like there's many songs that I'll listen to that I may have listened to sometimes hundreds of times, but if you were to ask me, what are the lyrics to the second verse, I might go, oh my goodness, I don't have a clue. While there's other people that just eat up the lyrics and they just analyze the lyrics, to no end. And there's, and it's beautiful how different people get to experience music. Some people get lost in the beat or the melody of the song. Other people are just so compelled by the lyric, and it's wonderful when all these various expressions get to present themselves and say, well, look at how beautiful this line was that the person wrote. Or the other person goes, oh my goodness, look at how the music soars when it hits this part of, the song. And it seems like if God is the author of this song, he would want us to have the most full experience of the song possible. And so it seems like in our culture, the mind gets a heavy emphasis. And not to say that the heart is any more important, but it's just to say that I think it gets a little bit of the short end of the stick sometimes. And so if in over the series of this 11 podcast, there seems to be somewhat of an emphasis on the heart. It's not because I think it's any more important than the mind. It's more like if I went into the gym and hired a trainer and said, hey, I want to be in the best shape possible. I'm trying to run a race that's coming up. And say he looked at me and he saw that my right leg was twice as big as my left leg. What's he probably going to start off with? He's probably going to say, well, Paul, from the way things look, we may want to pay a little bit of attention to your left leg. Mm-hmm. Now, the second that left leg got any stronger or larger than the right side, he would go, okay, hey, let's pump the brakes. Let's work on the right leg, but he would want me to be in full balance so I could run well. Mm. And so that's it. I mean, I think if there's any kind of perceived emphasis, it's not because of any, prescriptive advice. It's not because I think one is more important than the other. It's just, I think it's it's a beautiful thing when we can have this balanced offering of devotion to God with all of ourself.
It's so good, Paul. I mean, to double back down on a couple of things that you said, it is so interesting too, though, isn't it, that the section begins, Romans 7 at the beginning is talking about the resurrection and, that we are united to Christ in his death. Mm. And so suffering comes because of that. There's a reality that Christ suffered, that he died. We're united with Christ in his death. Mm-hmm. But then we're also united with Christ in his resurrection. And that resurrection life gives us both, the power to change in the present and also the hope. And so, it's absolutely true, isn't it, that there's a triteness with which we can talk about that. Everything we've been talking about so far, in a sense, has been focused on this. How does the Spirit of God help me? But the reality is the resurrection, it is actually resurrection power. There's at one point that he says in Romans 8, he says, if the Spirit of God, if the Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead lives in your mortal bodies, yes, he who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through him who raised you from the dead. And so it's like this idea that undergirding all of this is this idea that there is this power, and it's a power of life, and it is breathing life into us right now as we cry, Abba, Father, as we wrestle with the struggles in this life, as we wrestle with the brokenness of our lives and our bodies. So, but it's like the fact that power is actually the power of resurrection. It's constantly pointing to this hope that it's the same power that ultimately will see our bodies raised back to life in the fullest possible way. And so it doesn't add a triteness to it, because it's not just a pie in the sky. It's not saying stop looking in the present and just look towards the future.
Yeah, and just deny everything that's happening with you right now and just pretend like it's not existing.
Right.
Like that feels like a real hope. And it's not like I hope I get a new car next year or whatever. It's not like that kind of like wishing. But I feel like because we do have access to God, anyone who is willing to surrender and say, God, bring me close to your heart. I want to know you. I want to seek you. I feel like God reveals himself to that person in a way where you really do get a preview. And I think in some of these nights of the most excruciating fear that has finally led to just as much surrender as I've experienced so far, God's brought me in so close that you get a preview of what will be in a way where it just sets yourself at ease to go, oh, I know it's going to be okay because I've already tasted it. And I think if there's one thing that I could if there's one thing that I could encourage everyone, it's just to know that you have access. It's so good. every single one of you has access to the thing that's been crying out from the deep depth of your being from the first breath that you took. And it's right there for the taking. And it's like he's just always there. He's always there. And it's like all you have to do is want it and seek it and just ask, and it will be given to you.
Yes.
And it's like, why wait?
Yes.
Like if this is true, if this could be real, which that's what this song's about, it's just saying, this is real. Everything that we're saying, it's not just to give our minds some sense of peace to get through this life. It's because this is real, and I'm a witness of that reality.
Yes.
And it's so great. And it's just like anything. I mean, gosh, as trite as if you try a good restaurant and it just exceeds all your expectations, you tell everybody about it.
Yeah.
You got to check this out. So it's like, good Lord, if there's something that just overcomes the fear of death and gives you truly peace that passes all understanding and gives you this life and you feel this resurrection power and you go, it's there for the taking for everyone.
Yes.
It's like, people just got to know.
Yes, exactly. Oh, so well said. And I'm going to say it back to you. That sounds like good news.
Please.
That sounds like good news to me. That's your line, but I'm stealing it off you. You know, that just sounds like good news, doesn't it? There's not a denial of reality. You know, so many times there's an escape from reality or escape from what we know to be real. We don't have to escape from suffering. The fact of the matter is that God came down and became a person and suffered. You know, he understands exactly what we're going through. And so, you know, it's not a denial. It's not this fairy tale. It's not this, you know, sugar-coated thing. This is rough and tumble reality. God himself has got his hands dirty in life. And that's exactly what you would expect, isn't it? If this is a God who loves us amazingly, even though that we are specks of dust or more or less than that within the universe. It's too good to be true, it seems like, and yet it is true.
Yes.
God has come down. He has come down as our Father. He has become a person, a human being, so that he can understand us and relate to us. And then he has sent his Holy Spirit to live within us, to be constantly this breath, this life source within us, transforming our minds and our hearts and directing us towards him and renewing our hope and groaning. You know, it's all, it just is amazing. What kind of God do we have? You know, the picture that we have of God is so much bigger than so many people often give him credit for.
Yes. Yes. Oh, man. Well, yeah, just maybe that can be a prayer to leave on. It's just allow God to be that big. And don't try to, you know, maybe as much of a temptation as it is to go, hold on, I gotta put him into a box where I can understand him. And it's like, allow God to be God. Like, don't try to create him in your image. Like in the, you know, it's like we're made in God's image, but don't try to make God in human image like that we can understand. Don't try to dumb God down, but allow yourself to just be in this awe and wonder and allow yourself to be swept up in it.
Yes.
And in that invitation that goes beyond, at times, what the mind can comprehend, which is scary when so much energy may be devoted to that central control station, but when he's inviting you into that depth and that wonder and that mystery and that just glory that's just so big, trust and allow yourself to be swept away and brought in to the heart of God.
No one can see me punching the air at the moment, but that's exactly what I'm doing. I think that so sums up what this podcast is about, allowing God to be God.
Well, friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm about to play this song hidden for you, but it means so much that you would take the time to journey alongside us and work through these thoughts together. May grace and love and joy and peace be with you now and forevermore. Enjoy the day. Now I get lost in the sound of the song that's been singing. Has it been here all along? Well, I couldn't hear it. And now I can move to the beat that is deep in my being. Has it been here all along? Well, I couldn't feel it. But love mounts to the soul, into the senses. I am a witness. Love pulls me in again. Love pulls me in, and love mounts to the soul, into the senses. I can't resist it. Love pulls me in again. Love pulls me in till I'm hidden. Now I'm hidden. And now I can see it was you all along I was seeking. You've been here all along, but now I can see it. And now I believe I can finally drink from your freedom. It's been here all along, but now I can taste it. 'Cause love mounts to the soul, into the senses. I am a witness. Love pulls me in again. Love pulls me in, and love mounts to the soul, into the senses. I can't resist it. Love pulls me in again. Love pulls me in till I'm hidden. Now I'm hidden. And everything that used to be, now it feels like just a dream. I fade into this mystery till you're the only one that's seen. 'Cause love mounts to the soul, into the senses. I am a witness. Love pulls me in again. Love pulls me in, and love mounts to the soul, into the senses. I can't resist it. Love pulls me in again. Love pulls me in till I'm hidden. Now I'm hidden. Now I'm hidden. Now I'm